All right. The dead come back. Was opposed to the belief that man's intellectual faculties survive the dissolution of his physical body advance as proof of mortality that the dead do not return. The phenomena of spiritualism are not accepted by the materialist as evidence of this survival because of the difficulty of establishing by physical means the integrity of such manifestations. It is a mistake, however, to suppose that the vistas of the invisible world can be charted by clairvoyance alone. Men have died and have lived again, for returning from the veil of shadows, they have described with minute detail that which they experienced and beheld. In most cases, they were not even believers in the metaphysical. Before their miraculous death and resurrection, they were addicted to intemperance and excess. But after their return from the subterranean realms of Hades, they became men of exemplary morals, having been shocked into a new life of piety by the awesomeness of their experiences. By the irreligious, death is viewed as the final dissipation of both life and intelligence. By the devout, it is held as the beginning of a spiritual state where woe ceases and all things become miraculously perfected. To the rational minded, it must be evident that both these extreme viewpoints are, to say the least, illogical. If there be either reason or consistency in nature, order in the world, or justice in the divine plan, then all things must persist in harmony with themselves. That which is to come must be justified by that which precedes it. Ends must be determined by appropriate means, and all conditions must generate their similars. When a man disappears from his circle of physical associations, this circumstance is scarcely sufficient to warrant the conclusion that, on the one hand, he has utterly ceased to be, or that, on the other hand, he has become apotheosized. If men would cease to live anticipating some unreasonable post mortem metamorphosis, and live now as though they were to continue as themselves throughout all space and time, there would be a greater incentive to the improvement of present conduct. We are apt to overestimate the importance of death as an incident in life. Death is regarded as a change of condition when, in reality, it is only a change of place. Such change can produce no appreciable difference in either the moral or ethical status. As in life, so in death, a man is no better and no worse for where he is, but rather for what he is. A person passing from one room to another does not change his temperament at the doorway, nor does he cast off his attitudes with his garments. Life and death were terms employed by ancients to symbolize planes of human consciousness. By death should be inferred the condition of ignorance which results from the encroachments of the material impulses upon the providence of the rational nature. By life should be inferred the stimulation of the energies of the soul by which man is emancipated from bondage to the illusions of materiality. To paraphrase the Platonic argument of Plotinus, when the soul is merged with the body, so great a part of it sleeps or is obscured that only stimulation of the sense perceptions is only employment. Resurrection, therefore, is not the elevation of the dull mass of the body, but rather the elevation of the reason above this mass. Any phenomenal change from life to death or from death to life is unaccompanied by spiritual enlightenment, is only a transmigration from sleep to sleep, from dream to dream, like man passing in the dark from bed to bed. All real change must take place in the soul, by which in turn the body is tinctured. The vicissitudes of the body, such as its coming and its goings, while they have no direct influence upon the quality of the soul, may by indirection affect it as the mind, through the contemplation of phenomena, is led to the analysis of realities. Having been liberated by death from limitations of the body, man gains one advantage over his incarnate state. He has come to function in and become a part of that subjective world of which our objective sphere is but the shadow. Certain mechanisms of creation are, therefore, uncovered to his view, and if his understanding be sufficient, he may gain a better estimate of comparative values and degrees of truth. It follows that the more he has perfected his faculties during physical life, the greater will be his appreciation of the mysteries revealed to him while in the invisible world. Plutarch declared that when a man dies, he passes through the same experience as those who had their consciousness increased by the ceremonial of the mysteries. Thus, death is an initiation, and every initiation is a form of death. But as the mysteries refused admission to those who had not qualified themselves to receive the arcana, so the invisible world denies entrance to the unworthy, who must remain in the shadow land between place and eternity until it is appointed for them to return again into the dimensions of body and physical life. Thus, to the informed, death imparts further instruction, but to the uninformed, it renders issues more confused. There is no greater good than to behold and understand that which is beheld, and there is no greater grief than to be in the presence of wisdom, and through the poverty of the faculties, be incapable of partaking of the good thereof. When Cicero declared that the mysteries taught men how to die, he intimated that the initiates were prepared to interpret correctly the phenomenon of death. Death is not only an experience, but also an opportunity. As the majority of people, however, profit but little from these factors in this life, they can scarcely be expected to do better in the next. So for the many, existence there is but a continuance of their existence here, with the purpose of life as obscure in the one as in the other. From an examination of the philosophic attitude towards death, we learn that at the end of the soul disentangles itself from the mortal skein and retires into its own source. Being a superphysical essence, soul can insinuate itself into body and depart therefrom unperceived, being recognizable only through the consequences which these acts engender. It is also possible for the soul to separate itself temporarily from the body and afterwards return thereto. While its vital agent is thus absent, the body must remain inert. But when the psyche returns, it can lift the physical lump again into a state of action. Under such conditions, the soul retains its hold upon the body by certain magnetic threads, so that the vital functions are preserved. Turning along these threads, the soul again penetrates the labyrinth of matter and reanimates the frame. If the threads by which the body hangs suspended in soul are broken, however, then death is complete. The body becomes a derelict upon the sea of matter, and soul no longer can affect or control the empty shell. That the ancients experimented in these wonders and instructed themselves in all the aspects thereof is attested by Proclus, who, in a manuscript commentary upon the 10th book of the Republic of Plato, writes that it is possible for the soul to depart from and enter into the body is evident from him who, according to Clerchius, used a soul-attracting wand on a sleeping lad, and who persuaded Aristotle, as Clerchius relates in his treatise of sleep, that the soul may be separated from the body, and that it enters into the body and uses it as a lodging. For striking the lad with the wand, he drew out and, as it were, led his soul for the purpose of evincing that the body was immovable when the soul was at a distance from it, and that it was preserved uninjured, but the soul being again led into the body by means of the wand, after its entrance narrated every particular. From this circumstance, therefore, both the spectators and Aristotle were persuaded that the soul is separate from the body. The most famous of those who have returned from the dead to a more sober and constructive existence is Ardius of Soli, of whom Plutarch learned from his friend Protogenes. In the vision of Ardenus, G.R.S. Mead gives an account of this extraordinary happening with useful commentaries. Ardius, who was a man of great wealth and even greater profligency, stopped at no villainy and gained an unenviable reputation of being one of the greatest scoundrels of his time. He seemingly grew weary of evil and went so far as to ask the oracle of Amphilochus if there were any probability of his being able to improve the latter part of his life. The oracle is reputed to have answered with the enigmatical statement that he would do better after he was dead. Whether this answer preyed upon his mind or whether Providence turned defender of prophecy is not known. Artists met with an accident, however, and although seemingly uninjured, the shock brought on a semblance of death. There was complete suspension of animation, which deceived the cleverest physicians. 3 days later, just as the plans for his funeral had been completed, he rose from his couch of death and, recovering entirely from his strange experience, narrated to a few of his closest acquaintances the strange things which had happened to him during the period of his temporary decease. After this unpleasant experience, writes Mead, Artius became an entirely reformed character of quite exemplary virtue. Artius explained the amazing change in his mode of life and thought by what he had seen and experienced. Plutarch immediately recognized the integrity of the vision because of its agreement with the ceremonials of initiation. Artius explained that when his consciousness escaped from the body, he experienced a sensation similar to that of a sailor who had been swept overboard into deep water. After a little time, he seemed to breathe in every part of him and to see in all directions at once, as though the single eye of the soul had been opened. He was in space, and no objects were visible save the stars, which were at enormous distances from each other and of great size, and poured forth marvelous radiations of color and sound. The most significant statement in the vision is that concerning the souls of the dead, which rose in flame like bubbles, auras. These bubbles finally broke, and human forms, the astral bodies, emerged. He then described the confusion of those who, passing into death unenlightened, face eternity terror-stricken and move into panic-driven herds. Later, he discovered others who were shining with radiance and peace and moved through the higher reaches of space. Artius then wandered through an inferno not unlike the painted by the genius of Dante, an inferno that exists only through the fear complexes in the minds of human beings. At last, having come to the end of his vision, he felt himself as though sucked through a tube by a terribly strong and violent in-breath. He lit in his body, awakening just in time to prevent himself being buried alive. Relying upon earlier sources for his evidence, Proclus supports the general Platonic viewpoint as to the power of the soul to depart from and enter into body either by will or by accident. He gives 5 examples of persons who, having apparently died, were called back from the shadow to bear witness to the superphysical mysteries of life. The first was Cleomenes of Athens, a man who was given an attending philosophic discourses. Say that again. The man was Cleomenes of Athens, a man who was given to attending philosophic discourses. He was thrown into despair through grieving over the death of a friend and seemingly died. After he was laid out and prepared for burial, a gentle breathing was perceived, and his interment was halted. Cleomenes, after a short time, was restored to physical vigor, and described in detail what he had seen and heard while his soul was absent from his body. He related how his soul, or rational part, was as though liberated from bondage, so that it soared up from body and, having ascended above earth, came into places of various figures and colors, with rivers unknown to man. Still ascending, he came to a region sacred to Vesta, and was brought into the presence of gods of indescribable forms. His narrative reminds one of the world described by Socrates in his last discourse, an aerial sphere wherein beings dwelt along the shores of the atmosphere, even as men dwell along the shores of the sea. The story of Cleonymus is vouched by Clearchus, who was a disciple of Aristotle. The second example, Proclus, draws from historian Namachius and is concerned with one Polycritius, a prominent citizen among Aetolians. Polycritus returned to life after being dead or in a state of suspended animation for 9 months. Coming forth out of his tomb, he joined in a general assembly of prominent citizens, consulting with them as to measures to be adopted for the improvement of community. The circumstance was so extraordinary, Hiero, the Ephesian, and other historians testified as to the truth of it, sending a statement of the facts to the king and to Geonius. After returning from his wandering in fourth-dimensional vistas, Polycritius seemed to have increased in wisdom to a marked degree, from which it was evident that he had found favor with the gods. The third example is that of Euronymous of Nicopolis, who was buried for 15 days, after which he revived and described many wonderful things he had seen and heard while under the earth, the details of which, however, he was forbidden to relate. He had descended through a strange subterranean labyrinth, and while his body lay peacefully in the vault, his rational energies has explored the mysteries of Tartarus. It is recorded of this man also that his conduct was more just after his initiation than before. The fourth example is that of the Thessalonian priest Rufus, who rose from the couch of death after 3 days and performed certain sacred ceremonials attendant upon his office. Having thus fulfilled a vow to perform these ceremonies, he lay down and died for the second time, and from this death there was no return. The philosophers declared that the soul of Rufus, being bound to the terrestrial sphere by the weight of an oath, could not depart, but was held by the sense of an unmet obligation. The soul then returned to the body, reanimating it for a second time and permitting it to perform the rites to its vow, whereupon, released from further entanglement in matter, it retired into a spiritual state. The last example given by Proclus is Philonia, a lady who lived under the reign of Philip. She died, and 6 months later came to life again, died a second time, and was reborn once more, even to the third time. Her strange actions during the periods of her reanimation she declared to be according to the will of terrestrial demons, or spirits. It seems that her body was occupied by elemental entities who caused it to appear as though animated. Philonia also described strange beings as existing in the invisible worlds who conversed rationally with her on profound and varied subjects. Like the others, she interpreted the substance of the transcendental spheres in terms of light and color. Also, glorious symphonies and harmonies which thrilled through the subtle essences like some vast orchestration. American Indian mythology is embellished with numerous accounts of priests and heroes who have penetrated into the ghost land or spirit world and returned alive. Usually the ghost land is subterranean and reached only after an arduous journey through dark passageways infested with monsters and filled with natural dangers. Returning from the spirit world, the courageous warriors describe the adventures which befell them. This intercourse between the worlds and this power to pass from one to another were cultivated by nearly all ancient and primitive peoples. The myths of the North American Indians, Lewis Spence writes, in many Indian myths, we read how the shamans, singly or in companies, seek the spirit land, either to search for the souls of those who are ill but not yet dead, or to seek advice from supernatural beings. These thaumaturgical thaumaturgical practices were usually undertaken by three medicine men acting in concert. Falling into a trance in which their souls were supposed to become temporarily disunited from their bodies, they would follow the track of the sick man's spirit into the spirit world. The order in which they traveled was determined by the relative strength of their guardian spirits, those with the strongest being first and last, and he who had the weakest being placed in the middle. If the sick man's track turned to the left, they said he would die, but if it to the right, he would recover. From the trail, they could also divine whether the supernatural danger was near, and the foremost priest would utter a magic chant to avert such evils if they came from the front, while if the danger came from the rear, the incantation was sung by the priest who came last. Generally, their sojourn occupied 1 or 2 nights, and having rescued the soul of the patient, they returned to place it in his body. Not only was the shaman endowed with the power of projecting his own astral body into the land of spirits, by placing cedarwood charms in the hands of persons who had not yet received a guardian spirit, he could impart to them his clairvoyant gifts, enabling them to visit the spirit land and make any observations required by him. The soul of chiefs, instead of following the usual route, went directly to the seashore, where only the most gifted shamans could follow their trail. The sea was regarded as the highway to the supernatural regions. A sick man was in the greatest peril at high water, but when the tide was low, the danger was less. The means adopted by the medicine men to lure ghosts away from their pursuit of a soul was to create an astral deer. The ghosts would turn from hunting the man's soul to follow that of the beast. Among some of the southwestern tribes, we find the magic carpet ceremony. The body of the deceased is placed upon a small black and white blanket. This blanket carries the soul of the dead through all the mysteries of the underworld. The Indians believed that the man originally issued out of the earth and that he would return to his original home after finishing his wanderings in the mortal sphere. The red men expect to go back again under the earth when they die. This is a significant link with the initiation ceremonies of the Egyptians and Greeks, for the lesser mysteries were invariably conducted by subterranean crypts to signify, as the classical writers have testified, the relapsed state of the human soul. The Indians recognized not only the underworld wherein exists the ghost land, but also the superior world far above the clouds, where dwell the Manitos or gods. In American Indian mysticism are found many parallelisms with the old Chaldean metaphysics. Thus, life and death become merely the objective and subjective expressions of one state. Departing from the outer body of the world, men retire into their inner body of the world, but in life and death are bound to the terrestrial sphere. Hence, birth and death have no significance except when accompanied by a release of spiritual consciousness. Perfected souls do not wander in the ghost land. In the Egyptian system, Ameneti was the nocturnal sphere of the dead, while the true heaven was far above the North Pole. The ghost land is really nothing but the invisible body of the earth, wherein the souls of men vested in the more subtle garments of ethereal and astral substance continue their existence after shuffling off their mortal coil. From the ghost land, they are reborn again to live and die repeatedly until the soul, energized by the reason, dedicates itself to the escape from matter and, through high purpose and great accomplishment, soars upward into the world of the gods to return no more to the illusions of matter. As the initiation ceremonies of the mysteries constituted what was called the philosophic death and the philosophic birth, the rites contain numerous allusions to death, and in the higher degrees, the more advanced pupils actually pass through the experience of death, an experience created for them by the wisdom and ingenuity of the priestcraft. Many of the initiated hierophants and adepts were profoundly versed in mesmerism and hypnotism. They could cause artificial catalepsy, and by their own knowledge of natural law, temporarily force the soul out of the body that it might gain the actual experience of passing into the invisible world. Narcotic drugs were used to produce temporary clairvoyance and were noted by Salverti, who adds that the Christians drugged the communion cups to create visions and ecstasy. Charms, talismans, and fetishes were employed, spells and mantras recited, and elemental forces invoked. And in the lonely passageways of the ancient temples, all these agencies conspired together to acquaint the neophyte with all the profundities of mortal and immortal existence. Hence it was well said that a man was born again when he had passed through the initiations. He was held as one who had returned from the dead, who had approached the threshold of Proserpine, and had seen the gates of hell swing open to receive him. Every initiate of the ancient world had been out of his body at least once, usually aided by the priests. This experience entirely changed the perspective towards life, for it enlarged the horizon and established a new concept of values. Today, we firmly believe that when we are dead, we are very dead, indeed. But in reality, when we are dead, we are very much alive. Terms are often given undue emphasis. We take words too seriously. Death seems a dismal and ultimate expression when it actually signifies simple transition and is in no way concerned with a belief in a beginning or a fear of an end. If the ancient mysteries could be reestablished upon the earth and every man could die at least once during his life and come back again, he would, like the classical personages described by Proclus, return to a better ordered and more justly enacted life. Having passed through such an experience, we could not again be the same as we were before. This single circumstance is largely responsible for that indescribable interval which separated the philosophers of antiquity from mankind in general. The philosophers were of a race apart. A strange dignity, a commanding simplicity had been conferred upon them by the mysteries. As the oracle of Amphilochius said to Artius, we in turn might say of every man that they would do better after they had died at least once.